Welcome back, everybody. We are going to do a little bit more reading of The Lightning Thief. We are in the middle of a chapter right now, and I'm just going to move you over a little bit. And with this chapter, we have a lot of interesting things going on. So right now, Percy is all confused about going to the summer camp at Camp Half-Blood. He's very confused about what's going on and where he is and why he's there, and why his dad, who he's never met, wants to send him there. And he's playing a game right now. He's playing Pinochle, which is one of the best games ever, according to Mr. D, the camp director. And that's where we left off. So he said that Pac-Man, one of the greatest games ever invented, along with gladiator fighting. And then he's talking about Pinochle. I'm sure the boy can learn, Chiron said. Remember, Chiron is Mr. Bruner? Please, I said, what is this place? What am I doing here? Mr. Chiron, why would you go to Yancey Academy just to teach me? Mr. D snorted. I asked the same question. The camp director dealt the cards. Grover flinched every time one landed on his pile. Chiron smiled at me sympathetically the way he used to in Latin class, as if to let me know that no matter what my average was, I was his star student. He expected me to have the right answer. Percy, he said, did your mother tell you nothing? Well, she said, I remembered her sad eyes looking out over the sea. She told me she was afraid to send me here, even though my father had wanted her to. She said that once I was here, I probably couldn't leave. She wanted me to keep me close to her. Typical, Mr. D said. That's how they usually get killed. Young man, are you bidding or not? What? I explained. He explained impatiently how you bid in Pinochle, and so I did. I'm afraid there's too much to tell, Chiron said. I'm afraid our usual orientation film won't be sufficient. Orientation film? No, Chiron decided. Well, Percy, you know your friend Grover is a satyr. You know, he pointed to the horn in the shoebox, that you have killed the Minotaur. No small feat either, lad. What you may not know is the great powers are at work in your life. Gods, the forces you call the Greek gods, are very much alive. I stared at the others around the table. I waited for somebody to yell, Not! But all I got was Mr. D yelling, Oh, a royal bridge! Trick, trick! He cackled as he tallied up his points. Mr. D, Grover asked timidly, if you aren't going to eat it, can I have your Diet Coke can? What? That is creepy. Eating the Diet Coke can? Oh, all right. Grover bit a huge shard out of the empty aluminum can and chewed it mournfully. Wait, I told Chiron. You're telling me there's such a thing as God? Well, no, Chiron said. God, capital G God? That's a different matter altogether. We shan't deal with the metaphysical. Metaphysical? But you were just talking about, gods, plural. Meaning more than one. As in great beings that control the forces of nature and human endeavors. The immortal gods of Olympus. That's a smaller matter. Smaller? Yes, quite. The gods we discussed in Latin class. Zeus, I said. Hera, Apollo. You mean them? And there it was again, distant thunder on a cloudless day. Young man, said Mr. D, I would really be less casual about throwing those names around, if I were you. But they're stories, I said. They're myths to explain lightning and the seasons and all that stuff. They're what people believed before there was science. Ha! Science, Mr. D scoffed. And tell me, Perseus Jackson. I flinched when he called me my real name, which I never told anybody. What will people think of your science 2,000 years from now? Mr. D continued. They'll call it primitive mumbo-jumbo, that's what. Oh, I love mortals. They have absolutely no sense of perspective. They think they've come so far. And have they, Chiron? Look at this boy and tell me. I wasn't liking Mr. D very much, but there was something about the way he called me mortal, as if he wasn't. It was enough to put a lump in my throat to suggest why Grover was dutifully minding his cards, chewing his soda can, and keeping his mouth shut. So if you're mortal, that means that you can die, and if you're immortal, that means you can live forever. So I'm thinking, maybe Mr. D, there might be something to him right now. Percy, Chiron said, you may choose to believe or not believe, but the fact that immortal means immortal. Can you imagine that for a moment? Never dying, never fading, existing just as you are, for all time. I was about to answer off the top of my head, It sounded like a pretty good deal, but the tone of Chiron's voice made me hesitate. You mean whether people believed in you or not? I said. Exactly, Chiron agreed. If you were a god, how would you like being called a myth? An old story to explain lightning. What if I told you, Perseus Jackson, that some days people would call you a myth, just created to explain how little boys can get over losing their mothers? My heart pounded. He was trying to make me angry for some reason, but I wasn't going to let him. I said, I wouldn't like it, but I don't believe in gods. Oh, you'd better, Mr. D murmured, before one of them incinerates you. Grover said, please, sir, he's just lost his mother. He's in shock. A lucky thing, too, Mr. D grumbled, playing a card. Bad enough I'm confined to this miserable job working with boys who don't even believe. He waved his hand, and a goblet appeared on the table, as if the sunlight had bent momentarily and woven into the air into glass. The goblet filled itself with red wine. My jaw dropped, but Chiron hardly looked up. Mr. D, he warned, your restrictions. Mr. D looked at the wine in feigned surprise. Dear me, he looked at the sky and yelled, old habits, sorry. More thunder. Mr. D waved his hand, and the wine glass changed into a fresh can of Diet Coke. He sighed unhappily, popped the top of the soda, and went back to his card game. Chiron winked at me. Mr. D offended his father a while back, took a fancy to a wood nymph who had been declared off limits. A wood nymph, I repeated, still staring at the Diet Coke. Kind of like it was from outer space. Yes, Mr. T confessed. Father loves to punish me. The first time, prohibition. Ghastly. Absolutely horrid 10 years, and that's where they got rid of alcohol, and he obviously loves alcohol. The second time, well, she was really pretty, and I couldn't stay away. The second time, he sent me here. Half-Blood Hill. Summer camp for brats like you. Be a better influence, he told me. Work with youths rather than tearing them down. Ha! Absolutely unfair. Mr. D sounded about 6 years old, just like a pouting little kid. And I stammered, your father is? D Immortalis, Chiron, Mr. D said. I thought you taught this boy the basics. My father is Zeus, of course. I ran through the D names from Greek mythology. Wine, the skin of tiger, the satyrs that all seemed to work here, the way Grover cringed, as if D were his master. You're Dionysus, I said, the god of wine. Mr. D rolled his eyes. What do they say these days, Grover? Do the children say, well, duh? Yes, Mr. D. Then, well, duh. Percy Jackson, you think I was Aphrodite, perhaps? You're a god? Yes, child. A god? You? He turned to look at me straight on, and I saw a kind of purplish fire in his eyes, a hint that this whiny, plump little man was only showing me the tiniest bit of his true nature. I saw visions of grapevines choking unbelievers to death, drunken warriors insane with battle lust, sailors screaming as their hands turned into flippers, their faces elongating into dolphin snouts. I knew that if I pushed him, Mr. D would show me worse things. He would plant a disease in my brain that would leave me wearing a straitjacket in a rubber room for the rest of my life. Would you like to test me, child? He said quietly. No, sir. The fire died a little. He turned back to his card game. I believe I win. Not quite, Mr. D, Chiron said. He set down a straight, tallied the points, and said, the game goes to me. I thought Mr. D was going to vaporize Chiron right out of his wheelchair, but he just sighed through his nose as if he were used to being beaten by the Latin teacher. He got up, and Grover rose, too. I'm tired, Mr. D said. I believe I'll take a nap before the sing-along tonight. But first, Grover, we need to talk, again, about your less-than-perfect performance on this assignment. Grover's face beaded with sweat. Yes, sir. Mr. D turned to me. Cabin 11, Percy Jackson, and mind your manners. He swept into the farmhouse. Grover followed miserably. Will Grover be okay? I asked Chiron. Chiron nodded, though he looked a bit troubled. Old Dionysus isn't really mad. He just hates his job. He's been, grounded, I guess you would say, and he can't stand waiting another century, another 100 years before he's allowed to go back to Olympus. Mount Olympus, I said? You're telling me there really is a place there? Well, now, There's Mount Olympus in Greece. And then there's the home of the gods, the convergence point of their powers, which indeed used to be Mount Olympus. It's still called Mount Olympus out of respect to the old ways, but the palace moves, Percy, just as the gods do. That's an interesting idea. So where do you think they moved to? Where do you think Mount Olympus might be right now? Could be. Let's find out. You mean the Greek gods right here? Like in America? Well, certainly. The gods move at the heart of the West. The what? Come now, Percy. What you call Western civilization? You think it's just an abstract concept? No, it's a living force, a collective consciousness that has burned bright for thousands of years. The gods are part of it. You might even say they are the source of it, or at least they are tied to it so tightly that they couldn't possibly fade, and not unless all the Western civilization was obliterated. The fire started in Greece. Then, as you know, well, or as I hope you know, since you passed my course, the heart of the fire moved to Rome, and so did the gods. Oh, different names perhaps, Jupiter for Zeus, Venus for Aphrodite, and so on, but the same forces, the same gods. And then they died? Died? No. Did the West die? The gods simply moved to Germany, to France, to Spain for a while. Wherever the flame was brightest, the gods were there. They spent several centuries in England. All you need to do is look at the architecture. People do not forget the gods. Every place they've ruled for the last 3,000 years, you can see them in paintings and statues on the most important buildings. And if we were going to Madison, we could have seen some of the different Greek mythology and the Greek architecture that we would see at the Capitol building. Unfortunately, we won't see that this year. And yes, Percy, of course, they are now in your United States. Look at your symbol, the eagle of Zeus. Look at the statue of Prometheus in Rockefeller Center. The Greek facades of your government buildings in Washington, D.C. I defy you to find any American city where Olympians are not prominently displayed in multiple places. Like it or not, and believe me, plenty of people weren't fond of Rome either. America is now the heart of the flame. It is the great power of the West, and so Olympus is here, and we are here. It was all too much, especially the fact that I seemed to be included in Chiron's we, as if I were some part of a club. Who are you, Chiron? Who am I? Chiron smiled. He shifted his weight as if he were going to get out of his wheelchair, but I knew that was impossible. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Who are you? He mused. Well, that's the question we all want answered, isn't it? But for now, we should get you a bunk in cabin 11. There'll be new friends to meet and plenty of time for lessons tomorrow. Besides, there'll be s'mores at the campfire tonight, and I simply adore chocolate, me too. And then he did rise from his wheelchair. But there was something odd about the way he did it. His blanket fell away from his legs, but the legs didn't move. His waist kept getting longer, rising above his belt. At first I thought he was wearing very long white velvet underwear, but as he kept rising out of his chair, taller than any man, I realized that the velvet underwear wasn't underwear. It was the front of an animal, muscle and sinew under coarse white fur, and the wheelchair wasn't a chair. It was some kind of container, an enormous box on wheels, and it must have been magic because there's no way it could have held all of him. A leg came out, long and knobby-kneed, with a huge polished hoof, then another front leg, then hindquarters, yeesh, and then the box was empty, nothing but a metal shell with a couple of fake human legs attached. So what do you think he is? So Chiron is, we'll find out in just a second here. I stared at the horse, if you guessed horse, you were right, who had just sprung from the wheelchair, a huge white stallion. But where its neck should be was the upper body of my Latin teacher. It's a half man, half horse, smoothly grafted to the horse's trunk. Whew, what a relief, the centaur said. So he is a centaur, which is half horse, half man. I've been cooped up in here so long that my fetlocks had fallen asleep. Now come, Percy Jackson. Let's meet the other campers. Tomorrow's probably one of my favorite chapters in the whole book. Chapter 6, I become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. Turn and talk to someone around you, a pet, a stuffed animal, a parent, a brother or sister. What do you think this chapter is going to be about? Make a prediction about I become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. Sounds a little awkward. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.